The next section of new semantic elements in HTML5 covers figures, marks, and dates. Figure is a relatively new semantic element, or rather, certainly one that's seen some amount of turmoil updating. Right now, figure is paired with another element called fig caption. The idea is that you have all these images or movies or other figures, frankly, that have a description or a caption next to them, perhaps below, like figure 6, or a graph you can imagine that would have a description of what the axes mean would be the description. In these cases, it really helps to semantically link the two. In fact, you could even use it for the aforementioned case of an image with a long description. Rather than having it in an invisible attribute, instead having the long description in a figure caption. The next semantic element that HTML5 adds is the mark element. And while this is an element that is not that commonly used, there are some key uses that made it significant enough to be worthy of inclusion. In particular, it's for marking up, so to speak, highlighted runs of text. For example, when you load a page in a search engine or through a search engine, a lot of sites know that you got there from that search engine and know what word or words you were searching for, and often highlight those words in their page to help you find what you were looking for. That would be a perfect example for when you would use the mark element to mark up those little highlighted segments and perhaps use different colors, because you're indicating that semantic that yeah, this is a run of text that the users selected or searched for. The last element that we're talking about in this section is a time element. And the time element represents a lot of opportunity and actually a lot of challenge as well simultaneously. It was originally developed a while ago, a couple of years ago in fact, to help work around some of the challenges that we've been encountering in the microformats community with marking up dates and times. Specifically, when you mark up a time and a date in the ISO 8601 format, it's oftentimes not the most readable thing. And so the time element was created to separate out the human readable version of the date and time and the machine readable version so that we could mark these up without interfering with the user experience at all. However, it's got some limitations, and those have been documented. It's for precise dates and date times. And let me explain what that means. So this means that you can only mark up a specific day. For example, you can mark up 2010 April 8th, but you can't mark up 2010 April, which would be a specific month, with a time element. You also can't mark up just a specific year, like 2010. And these are common enough use cases on the web. Plenty of blog archive pages that are archives by year, that have archives by month. People mention times of years and months in common conversation or in blog posts as well, that it's kind of curious that this was omitted from the time element. In addition, the date and time combination version of the time element has its own challenges, and that is that while you can specify the fully human readable version inside a time element, you still have to use that not as friendly ISO 8601 date and time combined format. And let me show you an example of that, and let me show you what we can do to actually try and use the time element yet again, going back to that blog post from Jeremy Keith. So here you see in the footer, he's got the time of a post marked up with a paragraph, which is fine. What we're going to do is instead, we're going to actually put a time element, and he actually has it around this abbreviation tag. So we're going to put it closest to that. We're going to say time, mark up that whole thing. This is a specific date and time. And then go in and use the date time attribute to indicate the ISO date time. In this case, he's already got it for us there in that abbreviation. So we're going to copy this and paste it in there. Okay. So this is an example use of the time element. Now, the problems here are at least twofold. The first is that we're duplicating, actually in this case, triplicating the content. Whenever you duplicate content, you run the risk of it going out of sync, especially when it's in two significantly different formats. In fact, in this instance alone, we take a close look and we might realize, hey, wait a minute, this blog post says it was posted at 5:43 p.m. However, the timestamp says 5:43 a.m. If this was supposed to be 5:33 p.m., it should say 17 here. So let's go ahead and fix that. And it's good that we caught that However, that's an example of exactly what happens when you violate what programmers call the dry principle. The dry principle stands for DRY, don't repeat yourself. Programmers follow this principle because they know that when you do repeat yourself, the data tends to diverge and you end up between humans seeing one thing, machines seeing another, confusion, chaos. So in this case, I'm going to actually show you what we do with microformats in line with the time element at the same time to solve this problem. So the first thing we do is we remove this completely from the title here, attribute, because of the fact that that ISO date and time is not particularly readable or listenable to most folks. In this case, we don't even need the abbreviation element at all for the whole thing. So let's mark up the date and time separately. I'm going to put a span here and say title equals 2009-12-13. Fortunately, that's something that people can read. In fact, the date format of YYYY-MM-DD is an ISO 8601 standard international date format that happens to also be the most readable and understandable and listenable date format around the world. You might think, well, it looks kind of strange to me. I'm not used to hearing 2009, 12, 13. I'm used to hearing December 13th. Sure. To English-speaking audiences, that's absolutely correct. December 13th is more understandable than 2009, 12, 13. We're reading it that way. However, when you think worldwide, not everyone understands or reads and writes English, but people do understand numbers. Numbers are more universal than natural human languages, so this format tends to be the most readable. Let's go ahead and mark up the time as well. Just to illustrate that you can mark these both up separately. Now what we're going to do is explain how this fits in the world of microformats. This blog post, one of the ways to mark it up is with the HTML blog format or microformat. I'm not going to go ahead and do that right now. What I am going to do though is show you just for this piece how you would do that, which is first of all to take the overall container element and say class equals published. That's one of the properties of HTML. If you want to learn more about HTML and microformats, I strongly recommend you pick up a nice reference or a nice tutorial, like Microformats Made Simple by Emily Lewis, or Designing with Microformats by Andy Clark. In this case, we're using what's called the value class pattern to separately specify the date and the time. So what we need to do in that case, though, is actually turn these back into abbreviations, because that's how the value class pattern will know to pick it up, because it's an abbreviation with the additional class name of value. So we're going to do that to both the separate date and the separate time. In this way, when a user potentially hovers over the date, sees the tooltip, they're going to see an internationally readable, human readable date for the date and an internationally readable time for the time, as well as because this paragraph contains all the date and time information, and microformats through the value class pattern can combine that separate date and separate time. Now we've got this wonderful combination of the date is in one place here together and the time is here as well. One of the things I would like to see for the time element to really be usable is to allow this kind of separation of date and time, because then you can start doing interesting things like, for example, 5:43 p.m. is actually a syntax that's supported in the value class pattern. So I can switch this from being ABBR to being a span and eliminate this title, because I know that the value class pattern will parse 5:43 p.m. The other thing that you can do is you have the option of saying, hey, you know what, because I want international readers of my blog to understand the date and time of the year, I can actually replace that and put it in line. In this case, we don't need a title attribute at all. Notice what we just did. We just simplified the date and time to being in one place inside a class equals value for the date and the same thing for the time. We actually have solved the dry principle violation here, except for the time element. So my hope is that the time element can be enhanced to allow this kinds of date and time separation, and therefore allow dates and times to be properly and easily published and reliably published. These issues and more are documented on the What Working Group wiki about the time elements. Again, HTML5, it's not a done deal, right? It's still a draft that's in progress. So while there are certain areas that are very stable, that are very usable, like the changes to HTML4, and even some of these new semantic elements like section and header, footer, and nav, I would say those are really stable. Go ahead and use them. Others, like figure and fig caption, were recently updated and changed. You can try using those, but I'm actually advising that you just pay attention to them, maybe not quite start using them yet, because some of these have changed just even months ago. Fig caption didn't exist. We used to be using legend or potentially DT and DD to indicate the different portions of a figure. So who knows if this is going to keep changing or not. Finally, regarding date time, that's something that in some discrete cases you can use, in others you can't.